Hi guys, thank you for stopping by at Beginner's Mind with that fig tree. Over the last century, almost 90% of asset companies have disappeared. The corporate world can be unforgiving, but there are exceptions. India's biggest conglomerate, Tata Group, is one such. It was established in 1868 and it has been thriving since then. We had the great pleasure of chatting with R Gopalakrishnan. He's a former Tata Group board member. He's written over 20 books with recent on Tata Group founder Jamsedji Tata. We discuss why Tata Group thrived over 150 years, what are the lessons for today's companies, big or small, especially when Tata Group donates a significant chunk of its profit to philanthropy. For such meaningful conversations, do follow our channel. We can start with your recent book, Jamshedji Tata Powerful Learnings for Corporate Success. What inspired you to write the book? I think that is it a good starting point?
So, I joined Tata at quite a late age. I was 52 already. And when you join and change a company at a leadership level at the age of 52, it is likely that you're a bit cynical, a bit uh, uh, opinionated. But as I spent my time in 17 years in Tata, I came to the view that there is something that the people in Tata are doing intuitively, but that is producing results. And like a fish is not conscious of water, they themselves were not aware of what it was. I suppressed my desire to study the matter. I only thought about it while I was in service because you tend to be too close to the action. But after I retired, so around 2016-17, I started constructing my hypothesis and my views and my observations. And I did a lot of reading because I wanted to know what academics have found about this. I found 2, 3 books on Japanese companies, which are very old. I found American companies, people have written. I found books on enlightened capitalism, conscious capitalism. I read about 12 biographies of Andrew Carnegie and Ford and people like that. And all of this started coalescing into my head, into a torrent of a format and an idea, which I, in a moment of enthusiasm, mentioned to the editor of Penguin, saying, "Aisa mera khayal hai." And she got so enthusiastic about the idea. She said, "Oh, you start writing now. I'm sending you the contract."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But I felt I needed, it was a bit kacha, my ideas. They were not very well formed. And I also felt the need to have a co-author who could buttress theories or views with real stories. And whereas, if I take the metaphor of a cucumber, many people have diced the cucumber horizontally and produced either diced cucumber or horizontal slices of cucumber. I wanted to slice it vertically.
Okay.
And the vertical slices I wanted was to be time longitudinal. Over 150 years, what has it done? And how did they manage to transmit anything from one generation to another? Because there are 6 or 7 generations of chairman of Tata Sons who have gone in the past 150 years.
Yeah.
As I was doing this exercise, I hit upon Harish Bhatt, who's also a fine author, an experienced manager.
Yeah.
And both of us have no credentials in academics or in economics or management. Both of us were pilgrims who had walked the path, if I may say so, to Badrinath and come back. And he was very busy with his career, rightly so. But on the date of his retirement, his birthday, about 2, 3 years ago, I called him to greet him and said, "Why don't you join me in writing this book?" And that's how he came into the, it's a coincidence that both of us have number of books to our credit.
Yeah.
Both of us have written. And he tends to write stories and narratives. I tend to write principles and philosophy. And we got to this 10P formula. And frankly, I'm happy with the way the book has turned out. I don't take the credit for it. We had a lovely story to tell. We just happened to be the storytellers.
Yeah. I looked up at the Amazon. I think the reviews are pretty good uh, for the book. So I think obviously people are loving it. And I've read some of the synopsis, and it's a story which was important to be told. And Tata is one company, sir, that, it's always, I've never worked, at Tata, but it always fascinated me when I was in India. And a lot of people wanted to work with, TCS had a program also, right? The Tata, some kind of a program where they recruit from the beginning and people become senior leaders in that group. Now, how one company, how does one company can build a nation, Where did Tata Group, how did Tata Group do it? What's its contribution? How do you look at that?
Well, touched upon exactly one of the points of fascination that caught my attention.
Yeah.
Because I grew up during my career in the last 50, 60 years, reading that Fortune 500 list keeps changing. What was there in 1970 is vastly different from what was there in 2010.
Totally.
So the half-life of companies is declining rapidly. And yet I found Tata
Standing
had
tall.
been somewhere near the top, if not the top, as far as India is concerned, for over 100 years. The second thing that I found fascinating was there was a philosophy which had been transmitted from generation to generation. The third thing, just to mention three or four, that I found fascinating is whereas America rightly celebrates Andrew Carnegie for steel and Henry Ford for automobiles and DuPont for chemicals and Tom Watson for computer information processing, right to Bob Noyce for chip making, including Sam Walton for retailing.
Yeah.
And, I said, here's the same group has done all of these. And how did it do it? Because conglomerates are supposed to have died about 30 years ago, according to the management fund. And that's the aspect that fascinated me and caused me to inquire and create in my mind a mental model. It's a model which has been used in the book to explain this vertical slicer of the cucumber, and which I can explain if you wish.
Yeah. I think let's dissect it one by one and or the key ones.
So the slices, the 10 vertical slices are the P's, principles, perspectives, perseverance, so on, philosophy, and those are out in the book. And the metaphor that I created in my head is to take river metaphor. Now I'm going to take the Ganga or the Kaveri because they are well-known rivers in our country, but you could take the Nile if you want, or Euphrates or Tigris or whatever you want. They all have a source up in some mountain. When the Gangotri or the Talakaveri is a small, pure trickle. And it is the essence of simplicity, though capable of multiple interpretations. And that is why Gangotri or Talakaveri is a holy place for many Indians who would actually go there on a pilgrimage because it is the essence of simplicity. Then this river comes down the mountainside and becomes a vast river in width, with undercurrents and nurturing civilizations on its banks, different civilizations. And so you'll find Krishna Leela, you'll find Ram Leela, you'll find other stories of Mughal period. And there are stories in almost every 100 yards if you move down a village in India. And they are rich stories. They are not exactly, unknown stories. And the idea that a river could become so large and complex that it could nurture civilizations, icons, and have narratives around the icons caught my eye. And then, of course, finally it goes into the Bay of Bengal or wherever its conclusion is. And this idea of philosophy, icon, narratives, and ritual caught my eye. PINR, as we've said in the book. philosophy is the Gangotri. Icons and narratives are what happens. Ganga ke tat pe maiya mein kya hua? Until there are rituals that are coming. And this applies to religions also. I mean, if you look at Islam, what Muhammad said after coming back, or what Jesus Christ said, or Moses said, or for that matter, what Hindu philosophy says, they're all essentially very simple. But then they get interpreted and civilizations come around them. So you have Shia, Sunni, this, that, Vedanta, the lot of... and Tata was exactly that. Jamsedji Tata had a very, very simple philosophy. As we can see, reconstructing from his life and his actions. And his philosophy was, you do business to make enough profit to make an impact on society. So community was center stage. And that created the civilizations and the river flow. Initially it was Empress Mills, then it became Tata Steel. They came sort of sequentially. Some of them have died after that. Some of them have continued. And today, if Chandra is talking about going into chip manufacture with Tata Electronics, that's the newest village that's being constructed on the banks. But the river is the same. And anybody who's worked in TCS or Tata Steel will tell you we have got a very unique and distinctive culture, which is true. Just like anybody who is a Kayast will tell you we've got a very distinct culture, whereas somebody who's a Marwadi will tell you we've got a very distinct culture. But they're all cultures around the same principles, and there's a unity also. So what India is, Tata is a mini version of. Yeah, and that's how this metaphor came to my mind to describe Tata, the vertical slices. And you asked me to explain it. I hope I made a reasonable job of communicating what we had.
Thank you so much. I think let's dissect this. I think, look, I would be honest with you, sir, that I kind of thought, and it's very imbecile, and but I have no qualms in accepting it. I thought that Tata is all about J.R.D. Tata, because I think a lot of people talk about him, and I think the story of Jamsedji was is good to be told. Is great to be told, actually. The values, what was the what the values? It was the group was started on, Jamsedji started on. I think it was pre-independence, right? So
it was 1868.
Yeah, it was far it's like 80 years.
If you look at just for a moment to let our imagination run right, what were the times in which Jamsedji lived? And just to clarify for your listeners, there was Jamsedji, the founder. There were his two sons, Dorabji and Ratan Tata, not the current Ratan Tata, but his grandfather.
Okay.
And then it went into another branch of the family, Nauroji Saklatwala, followed by J.R.D. Tata, followed by this Ratan Tata, who's now, of course, 86, followed by Chandrasekhar and so on. Now, Jamsedji Tata went in what was the world into which he was born? He was born into an India which was going to be colonial.
Yeah.
He was born into a world where Britain was rising to be a world supremacy. They were fighting the Afghan battles. They were fighting with Russia in Crimea. They were trying to control the United States, which had just won independence. This was the world into which Jamsedji Tata was born. Geopolitics of a very high order, the victory of armaments technology for one class of people to subdue others. And he died thinking India may never become independent, or not being sure, but feeling very strongly, a nationalistic feeling, I would assume, that India must learn to do these things. And when he made a huge amount of money through his first one or two ventures, called Swadeshi Mills and then followed by Empress Mills, he wanted to endow the money to the community. And he made a speech, which is quoted in the book, in which he said, Providence has allowed me to make a lot of money. Almost admitting, कि मेरा इसमें हाथ है, but एक हिस्सा ही है. Providence, good luck has also flavored me. And therefore, I feel it's important that I return back the money that is well over whatever I might have legitimately earned. And then he endowed the, in 1892, the world's first charitable trust. By the way, that's an important thing. The world's first charitable trust was 1892, and it was called the Jamsedji Tata Trust.
You mean the world's, including
whole world? Yeah. Before Rockefeller, before Carnegie, it's the world's first charitable trust. In 1892, so you can well imagine when India was considered a subject country, and the whole world was dancing around whoever was Ambani at that time, which was John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie. But he made this trust for Indians to go out and study and get advanced education. And in the last 132 years that the trust has existed, it has funded over 5,000 scholars, at least 2 of whom have become President of India, Director General of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. They've achieved their own accolades in their career. And then he dreamt, as a result of a conversation with Swami Vivekananda on the boat from Yokohama to San Francisco.
Wow.
Swami Vivekananda said, why don't you create an institution where Indians can study science? In those days, Indians were supposed to go and do small little jobs, assistants to the white man. And he thought of this Indian Institute of Science, what has now come to be called Indian Institute of Science. And Lord Curzon, who was the Governor General at that time, almost laughed him off. But he went over his head to Lord Hamilton in London to say, what is wrong if Indians have an aspiration? He said, where will you find these Indians? He said, there are plenty of damn good guys. Don't worry. So that was the second sort of, he wanted to set up a steel plant. Why? Because he heard Thomas Carlyle on one of his visits to London saying the nation that has steel will have gold.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, mujhe steel chahiye. But nobody knew how do you make steel. And he went and brought the talent from America. He brought engineers from UK. And he set up what has now come to be called Jamshedpur. So he had risky, hairy ideas of those times. And that sort of spirit of entrepreneurship, which is all guided by the root cause, which is it should do good to Indians, it should do good to India. Now, all of them didn't succeed. He set up a shipping company called Tata Shipping Lines, which is described in the book, which failed for a variety of reasons. And he closed it down. He set up a silk farm. Today we talk of job creation in India. He went to Japan and he saw these silkworms. He said, "Yaar, ye bahut karigar hai isme. There's lots of work to be done." And he came back to India. He brought in a Japanese couple. All this was in the book, by the way, to come and teach Indians how to do silk farming. And in Bangalore, where the weather was nice, he set up the Tata Silk Farm, which subsequently was taken over and became the Indian Silk Board and has found its own life. Even today, if you go to Basavantgudi in Bangalore, you'll find a bus stop called Tata Silk Farm. I mean, it's not officially called Tata Silk Farm, but that's the name of the bus stop because for 120 years, people have called it the Tata. So the guy had enormous ideas, but they were driven solely with these three things. Is it good for India? Is it good for the community? Third question was, is it good for me and the shareholders? Okay. Today, in our different world, people have the questions the other way around. Is it good for me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure they even ask the question. Is it good for people? They will say yes, but good for the community, country, they don't sort of give it that much value. So I think there are lots of great lessons to be drawn from that. By the way, and then his genius is not that he had these ideas. His genius is that he made these ideas live for 100. Mind you, Andrew Carnegie or William Hesketh Lever or John Cadbury, they also had such ideas. They also set up townships, but they have not survived.
Yeah.
But Tatas have survived. And so that is the distinction.
What do you think? It's fascinating. You see, that the thing is that and one thing which I really like about your books and which I want to tell you is that you talk a lot about India. And I think you've done a brilliant job in talking about Indian entrepreneurs and Indian leaders because the world is fascinated by the West. Anybody in the West is a great leader, the companies. So I think, look, if you listen to this story and and the comparison with Carnegie, like who's kind of there are a lot of books inspired by him. And you see that this empire is surviving, contributing to India, its growth, employing people, making money and whatnot. You worked there. How did it percolate down? I mean, what do you think it continued? Like, why? How did it become such a resilient business?
So I take the example of a typical family, and I'm going to refer to an Indian family without
Yeah,
any disrespect to families of other
yeah, yeah,
nationalities,
yeah,
because we are familiar with that. When a child is born into a family, he's got two legs, two hands, as helpless as any other child anywhere in the world.
yeah.
Then gradually he is taught rituals. बेटा ऐसे नहीं करते ऐसे करते.
Hmm.
He is taught
Value.
values.
Hmm.
He is told stories. There's a grandmother around who put him on her lap and tell him some stories. You may not be an expert on Ramayana and Mahabharata, but mota moti you'll have the hang of it. Some people take to it more scholarly fashion, but many people get the stories. The stories is what they remember. So there are a lot of rituals. And my father told me, you're a Tamil, you're a Brahmin, this is the way you wear a tika, and your father told you something else.
Yeah.
And we grew up thinking that that's the best of the world. We didn't even recognize other things until we grew up and found that, oh my God, India has about 4,000 categories of people. And this is not the subject on which I should waste my time or money. So rituals is what we grew up with. But then the family also explained to you the icons and the narratives in the family. Dadaji gaon mein the. This used to happen in the gaon. That's why he left the gaon. He came with nothing but his. I'm sure the story of my grandfather and your grandfather are not vastly different.
Yeah.
It might have happened in different areas.
Yeah.
And you get the icons in the narratives. That grandfather was very blessed because his elder brother supported him, although his younger brother was not very supportive, etc., etc. And then you get into the so-called philosophy. So it's going upstream in the Ganga. You start with rituals, then you're told the icons and the narratives, and then you're introduced to the philosophy. Then Dadaji always said, "Ek baar zaban de diya to zaban ki baat hai."
Mm.
Who taught us all this? You didn't learn it in school or college. I mean, you taught this because icons were created. So in Tata's, they raised their managers. Today, if you take the total employment of Tata's, which is about 800,000, and I just took a rough calculation of the last 10 years, how many people have passed through the portals of Tata, the total will come to about 3-4 million. You multiply each one by 4 in the family, you're talking of a very large number of people who have been trained in exactly the way you raise your child or I raise my child, or many of us raise our children. There is a grandmother who tells you stories. That grandmother is called Husi Lala, now Gopalakrishnan or Harish Bhatt. We are writing storybooks. This is equivalent of Ramayana or Mahabharata in a small way, not to compete with Vedavyas in Mahabharata or Valmiki. There are rituals in the company. Everybody knows that 3rd March is the birthday of Jamsedji Tata, because whether you're in a Tata office in London, Norway, or Bombay, or Australia, 3rd March ko ek chota sa function hoga, where you will recall the founder. Now, I worked in Unilever 31 years. I don't think I met anybody in Unilever who knows the birthday of William Hesketh Needler. He's done, he's forgotten. Kitab hai, koi kitab padhta bhi nahi. So, everybody knows JRD's birthday is 29th of July. Why? Because there's a function when people will recall JRD's great qualities. It is much like saying, Mahalaya aaj apne purvajon ko yaad karo. And you think of whatever you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there are rituals, there are icons, there are narratives, and there are philosophies. Going upstream in the Ganga, you're going taken toward Gangotri. And all the people in Tata up this path. And that's how it gets transmitted. So you say that he doesn't look like a typical Tata man, whatever that means. You say, ye ladka Agarwal naam hai, lekin he doesn't feel like an Agarwal. You have these comments people will make.
Yeah, sure.
If very anglicized, forward-looking fellow with a big. They say, "Yeah, Agarwal ladka hai, lekin uska," and then you'll trace him and say, "Oh, his great grandfather or grandfather married outside the community, something or the other happened." It's exactly the same, and I'm amazed at the fact that having worked for the number of years I worked in Unilever, people don't know the birthday of William S. Cleaver. They don't know where he is buried. They don't know what he stood for, except a few people who have gone and studied it. It's an academic subject now. But he was also a wonderful leader. So the values got transmitted through the behavior of the leaders, subsequent leaders. And that can, have a finite life. Here you have to live it because that's what you've been taught. And that is the difference. And that's what makes the Tata story so unique that even people who left Tatas always remember the Tata years with lots of love.
No, I think this is fascinating. And the one thing which, Sir Gopal sir, which impressed me, or I'm nobody to get impressed on, but as a reader, as a watcher, that they've been able to diversify into the very correct, profitable opportunities also. I think you wrote a book on TCS also, right? And I was looking
Yes.
through the market cap of TCS today, the Reliance being number one and TCS being number two. And they went into the hotels at certain time. And they went into insurance also at certain point of time. They went into real estate also so they've been able to fuse this values along with a very good commercial acumen also. That's a view from a distance I see. And you think so? Do you have a view on that?
Well, one of the things that I find that Tatas do, and they do it without thinking about it, because that's the way they are taught to do it. It's just like an Agarwal boy may have a different instinct with money as compared to some Venkatraman. It is just that mahal in which you're raised that it brings it to you. But Tatas take a strand from the past insofar as they are very respectful of the family values. They aggressively live in the future, in the present, so they must run their company to be a good company. But they have embraced the future also. So if you think of them as three women, just for the purpose of a discussion, there is a past which can be considered an old lady and you ignored her. But no, Tatas will say, "Meri nani hai, dadi hai, and dadi ne ye mujhe sikhaya." They will always remember it. They will grapple with the present, which is like any other person, but their mind is always dreaming. कि मैं जब चला जाऊंगा इस कंपनी में क्या होगा? And that ability to embrace the future is the distinctive point that you mentioned. And the distinctive point is when Jamsedji Tata was running a very successful textile business in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, कोई पागल कुत्ते ने तो काटा नहीं था कि he had to think about steel, about electricity. When his son established those and started running them, कोई पागल कुत्ते तो नहीं काटा था. वो बोला एयरलाइन चलाएगा, एयर इंडिया चलाएगा, कोई केमिकल्स के फैक्ट्री लगाएंगे. So when J.R.D. Tata established those, then the Sarkar took away the airline, all that stuff happened.
Yeah.
Somebody said, "We'll buy a locomotive company and not steam locomotive, but make it into diesel locomotive." हमने ट्रक बनाना शुरू किया. So, and today Chandra is sitting, he say, "Yeah, software वगैरह है, वो आज की बात है, कल की बात है, परसों chips आना है." So he's going to chips. So I think this ability to be your feet locked in the past in terms of values only, your body responding to current impulses, and your head dreaming about the future is another distinctive characteristic of all great companies. And since my mandate is to talk about Tatas, I'll keep it to Tata. They've done that very successfully in 160 years.
Yeah. I mean, this is very inspiring, inspirational because, and again, I don't want to talk anything bad about anything, but let's say, for example, and you feel free not to comment. For example, if you take Reliance, I mean, it was founded by Dhirubhai, and when I was a journalist in India, I used to cover Reliance when I was when I was a journalist with CNBC. But it broke up, right? I mean, the telecom went somewhere else, but Tata has not, it has kept together, right? And that's where I think the thing of values which you're saying is that respecting past, being in present, keeping an eye on future. I think that made so much of difference, isn't it?
It is true. Again, as you said, without discussing somebody else, there's very distinctive structure in Tatas, which you won't find anywhere else in the world. And that distinction is that the parent company is private and the subsidiaries are public. Tata Sons is private.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah.
still private. And they are fighting to keep it private. Because Tata Sons is like the Garbhagriha in a temple.
Mm.
You don't mess around with what's in the Garbhagriha.
Mm-hmm.
That's the values. Then as the sons grow up, you spawn new sons.
Mm.
If I can consider Tata Steel or Tata Motors or TCS as one of the sons, then you let them run their own gharana.
Mm. Mm.
They may have their own subsidiaries and so on. But सबको गर्भगृह में आके सर झुकाना पड़ता है कि ये मेरे values है. They may raise public money, they may have quarterly results, but to keep their nose straight on the path of बगैर values का business नहीं चलाना है. That was the job of Tata Sons. And the rest of it was them. So a guy who joins Tata Steel, वो तो एकदम steel में मग्न है.
Mm.
And he knows everything about steel.
Mm.
He may not know anything about trucks or cars or software, but he has access to cousins who will be able to tell him. And as technologies converge and diverge, this is a great strength of Tata, which the current chairman is certainly pushing very hard. He says simplify and synergize and scale up. He's got his 3S formula, which is essentially the essence of what Tata is all about.
एक और बात सर है गोपाल सर, इसमें टाटास का शोषा नहीं है. I mean, again, without going into details, I was, we based in Singapore and we used to discuss certain marriage, 7 महीने से 8 महीने से शादी कोई हो रही है, इतना खर्चा हो रहा है, जगह जगह, talking all kind of things. But Tata's like, despite all the wealth, they have been able to manage the simplicity, very high elite
It's the other way
simplicity.
around. Because of simplicity, they are able to manage well.
Okay.
It's not the other way around, as you might have mentioned it. Because Jamsedji Tata set an example by saying, ये पैसा मेरा नहीं है, मैं इसका हकदार नहीं हूं. Providence has blessed me with this. So I know in some shareholders meetings, even during my tenure in Tata's, people have said to Ratan Tata कि आपका नाम आता नहीं है Barron's list में, the world's richest people. He said, भगवान का शुक्र है कि मेरा नाम उसमें आता नहीं है. आखिर मैं कौन हूँ? इस बड़े एम्पायर का 0.1% कुछ मेरे शेयर होल्डिंग है, वो भी मेरे दादा ने मुझे लेके गया. I'm not a businessman. I'm an industrialist. Other people may have a different view.
Yeah. Now, I think I just want to kind of ask a few more questions in the Tata legacy. Now, we had Jamsedji, which obviously started a legend of his own. How did JRD kind of came in on board, and what's like his acceleration to the group?
So when Jamsedji started this company, Tata Sons, Tata and Sons, it was called in 1860, it was a partnership firm.
Mm-hmm.
And the partners were Jamsedji and his Dorab and Ratan, and his cousin called R Tata. R Tata was the father of JRD Tata.
Yeah.
So the 4 partners who started it, when Jamsedji died, Dorabji Tata went to be on chairman. Unfortunately, Ratan Tata also died very early.
Mm-hmm.
And when Dorabji died, there was no other sibling, no other child in the family. That may be good or bad. That's not the subject of our discussion, and it's not right to comment on. So they had to find a cousin, which happened to be Nauroji Saklatwala. After Nauroji Saklatwala also died, JRD was only 34 years old, and he was chosen to lead. That is 1939. And of course, he had long stint of almost 60 years. So JRD is not the direct genetic child of Jamsedji. Just like Ratan Tata is not the genetic child of JRD. People assume that they're all father, son, grandfather, because they all have the same surname. There could be a company where there's Bhushan Lal Agarwal and his successor is Pratik Agarwal, but they're not related.
Can't be father and sons,
May be father and son, may not be also. But this is what I mean. People talk a lot about family managed business today. I'm not a great believer in family managed business. I'm a believer in values managed business. You can have good values in a family. You can have a good values in a professionally managed company. And Hindustan Lever is a very good example of that. Equally, you can have terrible manners in a professionally managed company, and America is full of them who do all sorts of things. Equally, you can have a family where it doesn't matter whether the family manages, but the ideas are, and Tata is not the only one. I've written about Tata because I happen to know something about it. Take Bajaj or Godrej or Asian Paints.
They're lovely.
They're also very fine companies.
Very fine companies, sir.
Very fine companies. And जो नए बच्चे आ रहे हैं, I call them बच्चा because they were not there 50 years ago when I started my career. Marico, HDFC, Kotak Bank, they're all big companies now, but they were non-existent. And I said, ये बच्चे हैं कल के खिलाड़ी. So I wrote those books also.
No, I saw that. So you're talking about JRD kind of working on the values. I think that the value system helped him to accelerate things further.
And of course, it was greatly helpful that JRD transmitted those values, practiced those values, and had a long tenure. Maybe one would argue, was he there too long, 50 and 60 years? But those were some of the aspects that shaped others.
Yeah. Now, I think the question is that what it means for today's companies, like what can they learn from, the success of Tata Group and the everlasting or the resilience of Tata Group?
So, I really feel, Rajiv, that what India has lacked, I'm now putting on my professional manager hat. I've worked in a lovely professionally managed company, Hindustan Lever. I've worked in a lovely professionally managed so-called family business. I'm using the words, though I don't agree with them. I said, what is common between Hindustan Lever and Tata? And to the extent of my knowledge, if I compare with Bajaj or Godrej, I said they were all companies which laid great values on sustainability. इसकी आयु लंबी होनी चाहिए.
अच्छा.
Sustainability comes not just out of ESG, but also passing on values, doing things in a way where it's not dramatic, but it lives for long. It is just like the way you raise your child at home. You want to raise your child to, all other factors being equal, live to the age of 70, 80, 90. You don't want to raise a child to die at 40. So sustainable. You raise your child to be humane. बेटा लोगों के साथ जो व्यवहार करते हो उसमें इबादत होनी चाहिए, इंसानियत होनी चाहिए, इनायत होनी चाहिए. And I'm sure your dad and my dad and granddads have taught us कि बेटा ऐसा नहीं करते, ऐसा नहीं बात करते दूसरे से. बड़ों को दादा कहना करो, भैया क्या करो. These are all small, पैर छुआ करो when you meet older people. There are no logic for it. You won't find a child in some other westernized families doing those things. But these are all inayat, ibadat, and insaniyat. So I think it's having sustainable, humane, and enlightened. Indian merchant charity is really rich. It is not that everybody was a thug and made a lot of money and took it away with it. There were people like that. But you look at the Marwadi community, you look at the Kutchi community, you look at the Chettiar community. I mean, they went all over the world. East Africa, they went to Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. Now they have become citizens. They're even the prime minister of your country or president of your country right now. They're all of Indian origin. And they come from those communities where बाहर जाके कमाई करो, ढंग से करो और इज्जत के साथ करो. So India has this great tradition of being what I call she, sustainable, humane, enlightened.
Okay.
It has been spread all over the place and is rooted in family values. Now, there is this whole base of atomized ideas within family values, and then there is this base of the Tatas and the Godreges, which are corporate. And the distinction, or where the transmission is failing, is how can you corporatize or bring those she values into many more companies? One of the objectives, it's a bit of a laudable objective, and I'm too small for delivering that objective, but it's a small effort in that direction, is for the government to not just keep making naya niyam. Today you ask any minister, he says we got an industrial policy. Policy mein kya hai? Niyam hai. Ye nahi kar sakte, ye kar sakte, wo kar sakte. Where do we promote values?
True.
And I would very much like to see India having a philosophical approach to enterprise. Ye enterprise karna acha hai. And enterprise must be run with sustainability, humanity, and enlightenment. And that is the way, if you look at our corporate landscape, today's latest numbers I'm giving you, 2020 or 21, the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises has registered 63 million enterprises. 6 crore hai. But you ask out of that, how many have a capital of 10 crores, which is not a big sum of money, $1 million. Only 19,000. Can you believe this? 19,000 out of 63 million have a capital of 10 crores. Of those 19,000, how many are listed? 4,000. Of the listed companies, how many are traded and cause a market cap? 200. So we are a land with a lot of atoms and a few molecules and 1 or 2 trees. This is what we need to change. It is not socialism or capitalism. How do you create? And I'm reminded in 1912, there was a Bengali guy who was studying economics. He wrote to Alfred Marshall saying, how can India progress? He said, if India had 100 Tatas, nobody can stop you. That's the direction in which we must move. And in that move, other people are doing lots of work. My co-author and I have made a small contribution.
No, that's amazing. I have 3 more questions before I let you go. And one question is, like, I've changed jobs. We talked about it, right? And it's a small company we're trying to grow. And you advise a lot of startups as well, sir. How can a small company thrive? You think in terms of a lot of mental models all the time. Even when last time we talked about, I think there is always you're putting a structure and, sometimes taking back to the history of India, parallels you draw. How can a small company thrive? 2 or 3 nuggets from you, what would those be?
Yes, fundamentally, in fact, I've just addressed a group of startup companies who wanted, in a moment of mistaken enthusiasm, my advice. I said, Dekho bhai, what is the purpose of a startup? He said, mere paas idea hai and paisa mila to I can make a startup. Kya karoge? Iske valuation बढ़ा रहा है. Valuation बढ़ा के क्या करोगे? मैं जल्दी से बेच देंगे किसी. So I said, तुम घर में, you have some physiological capabilities. You're now 25. शादी क्यों कर रहे हो? मुझे बच्चा पैदा करना है. क्यों? मेरे पास है, and I'm capable of producing a child. फिर क्या करोगे? बच्चे को मोटा बना के मैं 10 साल की उम्र में उसको बेच दूंगा. नहीं, ये नहीं कर. बच्चे को हम पाल पोस के बड़ा करते हैं. So I said, it is possible for a startup or a small company to make too much profit. They said, वो कैसे हो सकता है? We always need profit. I said, भाई सांस लेने के लिए आपको हवा की जरूरत है. हवा में ऑक्सीजन 20% है. मैं आपको प्योर ऑक्सीजन दे दो एक सिलेंडर से, तो वो मर जाएंगे. ज्यादा भी प्रॉफिट होगा तो मरोगे. जैसे कि ज्यादा ऑक्सीजन से बदन नहीं सहा सकता है. So remember, profit is the consequence and not the reason. लेकिन तुम्हारा मकसद क्या है? तुम करना क्या चाहते हो? ये नहीं कि मेरे पास आइडिया है, because having an idea is like saying I've got semen in my body. If I can introduce the semen somewhere, बच्चा हो जाएगा. That's no reason to have a startup. Now, I agree that there's an age for all these things. And I don't expect a 20-year-old, 25-year-old to think like a 80-year-old. But this is the idea I try to tell them. जरा सोचो किसकी भलाई कर रहे हो, क्या कर रहे हो, और ये भी सोचो कि बच्चे को जल्दी बड़ा करना है या बच्चे को ढंग से बड़ा करना है. कानून कायदे वैल्यूज के साथ बड़ा करोगे तो एक नतीजा निकलता है. जल्दी से मोटा करके उसको बेचने के, you're not rearing a broiler chicken. You're probably a vegetarian. I'm certainly a
I am
vegetarian.
vegetarian.
So you're not raising a broiler chicken कि जल्दी से जल्दी इसको 2 महीने के अंदर मोटा करके बेच दो. इसकी मीट की कीमत होती है. But unfortunately, the startup world is moving in that direction.
Valuation
And
is king.
many young people think, अरे स्टीव जॉब्स ने किया, उसने ये किया. यार एक आध आते हैं, गांधी जी बहुत कम आते हैं. हम सब अपने को गांधी मान के जिंदगी चलाएंगे तो नहीं चलेगा.
ना बात सही कही आपने, बहुत अच्छी बात कही. बच्चे वाली जो एनालॉजी है, आई थिंक that applies to me also, because sometimes I think, man, I'm 50 now, make some money, get out. But the moment you start getting that thing, you make mistakes. That also I have seen. So if you move properly with a bigger objective, it always makes more sense. पिछली बार भी हम लोगों ने बात, if I just suggest, again, this will help us. Two leaders in India you appreciate, or globally, who those are, top two in your mind. You've written 18 books, and I know you've written book on HDFC, you talked about HDFC, you talked about L&T also, obviously Tata's, but two leaders if you need to pick, and why?
I believe in all our minds, unknown to us, we have models of leadership. Those who are inspirational, those who are instructional. ये अलग compartments में बैठे हैं. Those who are inspirational are well known. तो उसकी चर्चा होती रहती है. तो आपने सवाल पूछा, so I can also reply and say, oh, Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi ji, Jawaharlal Nehru, Narendra Modi, depending on your ideas. But I don't know those people. And कोई अखबार पढ़ के थोड़ी, वो इंस्पिरेशन है. उनकी कहावत भी हम बता सकते हैं, but that's inspiration. Instructional, जिसने साथ बैठ के गर्दन पे हाथ रख के मुझे समझाए, that's my father, that's my teacher. He's not known. If I tell you my father, if I say I had a professor called XYZ, you say, oh, है कौन? But उसका असर जो मेरे ऊपर हुआ, that was instructional. And that had a tremendous impact on me, far more. अभी मैं बाहर जाके भाषण देता हूं तो मैं गांधी जी की बात करता हूं, Abraham Lincoln की बात करता हूं. Because if I say मेरे पापा ने कहा था, nobody is interested. But since you asked the question, I want to make the distinction. I have a lot of inspirational leaders, and I've given you examples of them. But the instructional leaders are my teacher at school and my father, and nobody is interested in what they taught me. Because your father and your teacher taught you the same things. But who's interested in Rajiv Agarwal's teacher and father? So you don't talk about it. ये बहुत बड़ा अंतर है instructional and inspirational leadership.
No, and instructional जो leadership है मेरे ख्याल से, that had a far-reaching impact on you.
Exactly. It had a deep impact on you.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. कोई मैंने बड़ी गलती की और हमारे बॉस ने ऑफिस में कहा, बेटा आइंदा नहीं करना, ये हो जाता है. जो असर वो मेरे ऊपर हुआ वो मैं ही जानता हूं. अब दूसरों को कहो तो बोलेगा हाँ. But it is your question was who's had a great impact on you, and that's my father and my teacher in school.
That's amazing. That's a great enough answer for me. And two books, not your, I mean, I know obviously you've written so many books, but two books which I'm sure you must be reading, right? I mean, all other authors as well. Are there any two books, authors you want to leave something for the viewers?
Well, I read lots of books, and unfortunately, I don't remember all their names.
Yeah.
But I was very influenced by a book called The Enlightened Capitalists.
Oh, okay.
And that's been one of my recent books which I've read, which which has influenced a lot of my thinking in writing this current book. That's by a chap called James O'Toole. He's a former professor at the University of Southern California. And it's a fat book, but it gave me one helicopter ride into many people whose names we know, but were not able to compare one with the other. A second book, which has had a lot of influence on me, is by Doris Day Kearns, Kearns. And she wrote a book called A Team of Rivals. She's a historian, and she wrote a book called A Team of Rivals, which is about how Abraham Lincoln deliberately brought his rivals into his team so that he would be challenged and come out with better decisions. And I found that to be quite remarkable at a time when America was tearing apart with all the problems that it had at that time. And both of these have had a very significant, it's very easy to give a speech that you must be open-minded to other people's ideas. But most of us in our personal leadership style
can't do.
This is not practical.
Yeah.
But reading such books brings out how it can be practical and I have practiced it. I can tell you the influence it had. My first 7 books I wrote were all solo.
Okay. Yeah.
And you'll find those 7 books here on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to the blue book, Crash.
Okay.
Okay. Then I said, if I collaborate with somebody, it will be more work, but we might produce a better book.
Yeah.
And I started collaborating, and my next 13 books were all co-authored.
Wow.
So 7 books, sole authorship, 13 books co-authored, including the latest one.
Okay. So it's 20 now, not 18. I was
hand,
thinking 18.
Sorry?
I was thinking it's 18 books. It's 20.
20. And I can put my hand on my heart and say that the co-authored books are much better in the range and diversity than the singly authored books. Yeah. That's my view.
No, I think it's amazing. You're walking the talk. It's not easy, but
not easy.
Yeah. The last question. You're still the board members and you're working with the corporates.
I've now given up most board. I'm last one, only one company is there that I'm a board member. But go ahead.
Castrol or?
I've just stepped down from Castrol last week.
Stepped down from Castrol. But when you were board members of these various companies, what were you telling the board? What were you telling the CEO? What was your suggestions to them? Let's say any chat you are having one-to-one or in a board, how to run the company better. What would you tell them?
Well, I was on my pet subject. It did happen from day one. My ideas also got shaped as my experience went up. And I wrote this book number 18, which is called Inside the Boardroom. And I said, our job is to be watchful and not sit on the CEO's head.
Okay.
And that means that you don't have to wait for everything to be proved. If the CEO is doing about the right things, keep him going. He may not do everything right. You don't have to make a big song and dance about everything. But if he's behaving in a suspicious manner or a greedy manner or in an avaricious manner, pull the plug before he becomes a disaster.
Okay.
And the 2 books I've written, one is a blue book on the second row called Crash, and the red book on the bottom row called Inside the Boardroom. Together, bring out how by a board not being watchful. And they said, we don't have proof, how can we do it? You see, there are 3 levels at which companies are judged. One is people, like a parent. A parent looks at initial signs. If your child is coming home at odd hours, with odd habits, as a parent, you don't have proof, but you try, husband and wife, to find out what's influencing the child, who are his friends, why does he stay up late, etc. The second level comes the regulatory authority. If you've not done your job, the child does something, he becomes a pickpocket, and then the regulatory authority steps. The third level is the court. So somebody may have been a crook, but he gets through all of these, but in the court he is left go because they can't prove it. You don't have to be a court. to be in a boardroom. You're rewarded as a director in the boardroom and you're doing your job, you can be a parent.
Right.
Don't try to be the regulator. Don't try to be the court, but be the parent. And if you can't bring the attitude of a parent to your company, don't get onto that board.
I think this is amazing nugget. It's learning for me, as I said, every time I talk to you. On that note, I think we can finish this conversation, Gopal. Lovely chatting with you. Namaskar. I'm so grateful and thankful for your time.